Welcome, listeners. I'm Lawrence Yang, a family doctor in Surrey. I'm calling you from the unceded traditional territories of the Semiahmoo people. Um, Today we have with us Dr. Bill Clifford. Bill, you're up. Where are you?
I'm on the traditional territories of the Lake Wata people and the Weway-Kum and the Weway-Kai First Nations. In fact, the Molka First Nations is just like 10-minute walk from here. So Campbell River, and it's beautiful area.
Yeah. Campbell River, is that, it's on the mainland up northwest kind of thing? Of,
Yeah,
of,
no,
of,
it's on that's Powell River.
oh,
Um, it's on Vancouver Island, and it's at the narrowing that leads into Discovery Passage.
ah,
And we get the southeaster winds that blow right up all the way up the channel there, right? Yeah, so and we're about 3 blocks from the ocean, so we get some very interesting weather here.
oh, wow. Are you on higher ground? Every time I think about properties near the ocean, I'm thinking like tsunamis and stuff like that. Do you ever
Well, it's
think?
funny you should mention it, but I looked at the contours, and strangely, we're about 1 meter above the contour line for expected extreme of tsunami. So my theory is that if there is a tsunami, we'll have beachfront property for a little while.
Great estimation. You weren't too close to be submarining.
That's right. We're hoping the basement will be fine. Yeah.
So Bill, you and I, we've connected through the Health Data Coalition. Um, but aside from consulting for Health Data Coalition, and so where do you work these days? Are you doing any more family practice these days?
No, I actually gave up full service family practice in the early 2000s. I was a
Mm.
medical advisor for WorkSafe BC for a while as well, into the later 2000s. And I was also around that same time I became CMIO of Northern Health. And the
Oh.
combination of that plus running a consulting electronic medical record system, or
Mm.
consultant to a system that I built and I distributed only as a consultant, not as a product.
Mm.
I ended up saying I can't do full service practice anymore. I'm overstretched with the CMIO role itself is enough all by itself. But yeah, so I haven't been doing full service practice for a while, but as you know, I've been having my hands in all kinds of stuff to do with information technology. I donated my EMR to a nonprofit in 2007,
Mm.
and I doubled my investment in that overnight. I donated it for $1, and I got a plaque with a loonie and a paper dollar bill on it. So
Wow, what a return! What a
that was
return!
my best financial investment ever. Return. But yeah, so I'm working on standards today as a retired. I retired from my CMIO role in 2019. I've been still doing information standards to some degree. I've been working with RCCBC on some projects, and as you know, I still stayed on with HTC for a while until I was trying to pull back from stuff and make room for the younger people that were obviously really keen and doing some good stuff. So I thought better give them the opportunity and just be available for help as needed while I'm still alive.
CMIO stands for Chief Medical Information Officer.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
What does that role look like? Is it really just advising on like these are the systems that we should do? These are the things we have to watch out for as technology becomes more and more integrated into the health system. Is that what it looks like?
Well, I think it looks different in different jurisdictions. It just depends on the organization that you work for. I think there's a pretty common undercurrent that my CMIO colleagues will agree to, that it's incredibly uh, a lot of work. It's covers in my situation, it covered a huge gamut from co-leading the entire IT part of the organization, but also being a medical director and being sensitive to the clinical side and working. I also sort of worked on the side as still with the Prince George Division of Family Practice, and I did that so that I could keep my foot in both camps, as it were, to understand what are the needs out there that we're trying to serve, actually, with information technology in the north. And yeah, so that was a bit of a nightmare. I learned how I could do 3 meetings an hour by showing up for 20-minute slices. I'm not sure that that was really a very effective solution, but it seemed better than declining meetings. And yeah.
Wow. Well, yes, I have a little sense now in where I am in my career of trying to definitely bridge silos by being in different meetings, but also how do we most effectively show up when our schedules are so busy? Um, yeah,
Mhm.
that's a neat technique to divide the hour into three and and then distribute yourself amongst the
Yeah,
three.
I'm not I'm not recommending it, but I'm just saying it is a possible survival strategy if you need to. But
Oh my God. It speaks to the busyness of anybody who is in healthcare and healthcare leadership. Now,
I do, I've just, as a plug to my CMIO colleagues around the country, it is like, there's much more flavors to that, depending on whether you're, say, in Vancouver Coastal and Providence and you're putting up the Cerner system, the EHR for the thing. I mean, that's a massive task unto itself. Not to mention, you always get pulled into medical leadership stuff that's associated with IT and sometimes just medical leadership in it by itself. Like, yeah.
so it sounds like you built an EMR and it's called AmCare.
No, good guess. I was involved with something called AmCare, which is perilously confused with Amway, but nothing to do with pyramid selling. No, the EMR that I developed in the 80s was the Medical Office Information System. I wanted to be pure and not have some catchy, glitchy name or anything. Just let's just call it what it is. And to some degree, I regret it, mainly because the acronym MOIS was pronounced moi. Uh, uh, all kinds of different people confused, like they look at it and they wonder, what, my what? So, and then when I started actually getting asked to do the possibility of creating software for legal offices and dental offices, it led to weird names like Lois and Dois. So that I realized then I really boxed that in. That was not a good thing. But anyway, it still exists today as MOIS, and I think it's been around long enough. It's become an English word that doesn't mean mine, and or me. And yeah, so that was where I started doing that in the 1980s when I left the residency program just to work in practices. And I'd had a pretty extensive IT background before going into med school. And I was super frustrated with paper charts. And in fact, one of my mandatory project in the residency program in Manitoba was on terminology subsets required to support a fully featured electronic medical record. Yeah, so that bewildered a lot of people. I got an award for it. I'm not quite sure that it had anything to do with content excellence or that. I think it was just so weird that people thought they should do something. But yeah, it was an interesting thing that actually has served me to this day. I am working on some of the subsets that I listed in that 1985 paper.
Wow, it's kind of become your life's work.
Yeah, well, it's a bit depressing because that also means that this has been going on for a long time, and I'm still doing the basics of creating, say, a standardized subset that would be acceptable across Canada for things like gender, sex, and sexual orientation, or housing, or other socioeconomic determinants of health, like education and occupation and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you're you're a visionary. you see things before other people do, and sometimes multiple decades before other people see it, and so you have to wait for the world to catch up sometimes, and it can be frustrating, but it also makes you kind of like a lightning rod for inspiration too. So tell us about how that started. You said you started with a computer science background before medical school. Where did you grow up? How in what context did you, uh, were you exposed to computers
Yeah.
as
Well, I certainly didn't grow up with computers because I grew up in Prince George in the 60s and 70s. I went through all school there, or grade 1 to grade 12, and I was quite interested in math and physics. I found those topics interesting and not too difficult. And I had a phenomenal teacher in grade 11 and 12. His name was Roger Fox, and he was from India. His family had lived in India for many generations, and I wasn't aware of that actually until I left high school. But my father's side was 150 years in India, and so it was quite interesting that I, I just got along with him really well, and we did have this sort of like I never lived in India or had that background, but my family did, and there was just certain things that sort of happened that just sort of felt so natural, and that really encouraged me to stick with the math and the physics. And I'd never had any intent on being a mathematician or a physicist, but I found it interesting, challenging, and potentially multi-purpose useful. Like
wow.
like designing the asymmetric trusses in a greenhouse that I built once. I thought, thank God for grade 12.
Wow. So you build greenhouses as well. So you built EMRs, you built greenhouses, you build
Yeah.
teams, you build software. Wow.
But I never did any computer courses per se. I graduated, I had a varied, fickle course of what I wanted to do. Oceanography was number one, and I went to university fully intending to be going into oceanography. And my father was a forester, a forest management appraisal forester in silviculture, and I knew that I didn't want to do that. And I'm saying that facetiously because I ended up doing forest ecology, and that gave me quite a big background in thinking about ecosystems and how things are interrelated. And I was very interested in it because I spent a lot of my youth uh, paddling in obscure places or going on wilderness various adventures long before I probably should have been doing on my own. But my parents seemed to somehow trust my best friend and I, who had spent so much time in the bush, that we were allowed to go on a 2 week canoe trip into the middle of nowhere, 70 miles on a single track dirt road just to get to the put in. And we were gone for 2 weeks while they landed on the moon. So in 1967, at the age of 14, my buddy and I were sitting on the beach after dinner and looking at the moon, wondering whether they made it. And we knew that we wouldn't find out for another 10 days. So that eventually circled around, and I completed forest ecology degree. And actually, my thesis advisor, um, what do you call it, successor, was the lady who wrote the book on the mother tree. And I met her in the airport once and recognized her, and we said hello, and I mentioned Hamish Kimmins, and her eyes, and then she knew that she was talking to somebody who wasn't just pulling her leg. And it was an interesting, very brief meeting, but it brought me back to my roots many years later. But I went in to do a master's degree in an ecological pursuit after it was about spruce budworm in the Maritimes. And that led, because I was working on information modeling, to having to learn how to program, but also led into doing forest yield work, simulation modeling, very first simulation model, I think, in history. I could be wrong on that. If this is, a lot of people listening to this later, they may call out on that, but I'd be surprised if there was an instance, because we had a lot of international cooperation on some of this work back in those days. And so armed with that background, when I went to med school, that's where I could start to see how we really needed technology in health, and this whole paper chart thing, and being unable to do any kind of quality improvement or quality self-directed quality assurance. Was never very interested in administrative or regulatory assurance, but I was definitely very interested in how do I assure that I'm doing things that I know I should be doing, and then how do I engage in things that I know can be done better. So that's where sort of the assurance and improvement blend kind of drove me to do write my own electronic medical record, which started out first with the demographics and a problem list with a billing component attached to it. And the problem list was going to be the thing that I could do my panel. So this was in 1990. And I have to say, word of mouth got out with this, and most people really wanted a billing program for cheap. So they saw me as an opportunity. But the first specialist that took my software in 1992, I believe it was a dermatologist. And the reason he got it is because he wanted to be able to manage his psoriasis patients, his autoimmune disorder of different sorts and different things in his practice. So he saw, hey, a problemist will let me do that. So primary care wasn't wasn't bleeding edge on the panel management. Even dermatologists were interested in that.
Wow. I had the vision of your parents trusting you and your best friend to go into the forest and take a canoe and paddle somewhere and camp somewhere and look up at the stars in rural British Columbia, trying to look for the moon. Is that what it was like?
Yeah. We had that place I mentioned. It's the Nation Lakes, and they're a chain of 4 lakes that take you, I think it's about 80 miles or so, with 2 rivers to traverse, lining canoes up, and not any portaging coming down, but there's log jams to contend with. So yeah, so that was good. I later did it with my wife and our two boys,
Mm.
and that was really interesting. Now we got smart, because by that time there was a road that took you 5 hours on gravel to drive all the way around to the last lake, and we got somebody who could drive our vehicle back. Vehicles was another fellow and his son, and we then paddled that one way full distance.
Yeah, you were able to save on some of the portaging on the carrying
Yeah.
of the canoes.
Well, yeah, it was all downhill. Yeah, and I remember telling
Mm.
my boys and my wife the story of that when my buddy and I, age 14, getting stuck on that third lake.
What was your buddy's name?
Grant. Grant.
Grant.
Yeah, so
Mm.
when Grant and I got stuck in the rain, it was pouring rain when we're on the third lake, and we saw this trapper cabin, and we said, well, we'll just go in there and hang out, because it wasn't locked. And to our horror, because of the weight of us in the cabin, a post that had been put to support the roof and snow load in the winter just suddenly just sprung loose and fell and broke a window. And we were really devastated. Like, we did not want to do any damage. And we subsequently, when we returned, we dug around to find out who owned it, who turned out to be the uncle of one of my best friend's wife, and family. And anyway, they didn't accept payment or anything. Anyway, so I told them the story. We found the cabin. We went into the cabin, and the broken glass and the frame were still leaning up against the wall. And this was like 40 years later.
Wow, it's like a time machine. You had a time machine experience. Oh, with a family. How meaningful.
Yeah, it actually shows that they didn't use the cabin very much. The window was fixed, but the broken one was still there.
You know what? There's so many values that are coming out from the story that you're sharing. The sharing of how your family, your parents trusted you in the wilderness, kind of independently as a 14-year-old. That trust of the world, and also how your study of ecology and ecosystems really gave you an understanding, a grasp of the interdependence of all beings and all of all life. So really beautiful start. You mentioned the 150 years of your paternal lineage residing in India. Speak to me about that. What was that about?
Yeah, I've only become recently when I got interested in ancestry, trying to track back legendary, as it were, characters in my family's history. And it's still a bit fuzzy about the exact timing of when my great 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 grandfather apparently fled Ireland on the eve of graduating from Trinity College Dublin. And I think he decided that a life in the church wasn't for him, and he jumped a ship and went to India. And then uh, two generations later, I think it's my great, I get the numbers of greats mixed up here, but my great great grandfather became a judge in Delhi. He was one of the chief judges
Wow.
in that area. The law library right now, actually in Delhi, is named after him. In the old part of
Which
Delhi, yeah,
which library?
the law library, but in the old law building in the old part of Delhi.
In Delhi. And what is it called? It's called.
It's called the Samuel Clifford Library.
Wow, Samuel, your great 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 or great grandfather
Great great grandfather, yeah, two greats.
has a library in New Delhi named after him.
Yes, and my grandfather, actually, was great grandfather was Samuel. My grandfather was the lieutenant in the Hussar Regiment and became lieutenant colonel in the Boer War. And he was working with Kitchener and was the commanding officer at the relief of Ladysmith in the Boer War. So that,
I don't know enough history to know where these wars were. Where was this
well,
battle
the
happening?
Boer War was South Africa in the 1902, I think, or 1901. A little
Oh.
fuzzy on the exact dates. It was a pretty devastating war between the Dutch Africans and the English South Africans.
Hmm.
And so, and it's interesting that my grandfather was a cavalry person and was charged with being the commanding officer, as I said, and he had to develop a troop, a battalion or whatever to do this. And he thought, I guess, where can I find the toughest, meanest people that are used to riding horses where there's no water and there's no cover? So he thought, Australia. And he formed the Western Australian Regiment, and because the British were sort of stuck on themselves in military sort of hierarchies, you had to have a British commanding officer of a British regiment. So he was the commanding officer of the Western Australian Regiment. And when we were in Canberra, we found his plaque and his file in the War Museum in Canberra.
And this was your great grandfather?
Grandfather. No, this is my grandfather.
This is your actual grandfather, and so he worked in Australia and helped to recruit horse riders for
Yeah.
battle.
Yeah, I am not sure yet he ever stepped foot in Australia. But he somehow managed to recruit from the outback who were excellent riders and excellent at deprivation, and yeah, and probably excellent marksmen.
So some of your family went from Ireland to England, and then to India, and then to South Africa.
They missed India or England altogether. They just went straight from Ireland to India. Yeah. So,
Wow.
but it came around. It's a bit complicated, but don't know whether anybody's going to be interested in all those details, but yeah, England featured prominently in that, and my grandfather did return to England in the First World War to be the assistant chief of police for the Canadian Armed Forces there in the First World War.
Oh, so your grandfather actually became Canadian?
Yeah, they part of the land grant thing after the Boer War, got a grant of land in Alberta, and
Oh,
then returned back.
I see.
And then
What?
something that's still a complete mystery to me, but I do have a silver goblet as proof and a lot of papers that to my father's godfather was R.B. Bennett, the Prime Minister of Canada. So at the time, because of the relationship that my grandfather had with him. And that was all through this Lord Kitchener and all these other relations.
Oh, wow. So some of the leadership of Canada from back in the day was your father's godfather. Wow. R.D. Bennett. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it's all very mysterious, but of course, it really bears nothing really to me other than it's my family history, right? But I never, my grandfather died before I could talk to him. He was long before I was born, and but anyway, it's just part of the background. But I think growing up though with all of this stuff and like Roger Fox that I mentioned with that background in India as well, and all of these conversations stimulated me to do stuff, to go and aspire to
Yeah.
getting a postgraduate degree in ecology um, that led me into all kinds of interesting directions at that time. A lot of very good work that positioned me really well for both med school and then subsequently my interest in primary care and healthcare systems improvement and quality improvement.
It is a very good background. I mean, it's proven to be, but it's not historically seen as the typical background for a medical student, especially in the context, today's context. I mean, in today's context, people don't rarely have that, that level of international experience and international history to drive them and to give them the confidence to explore in such a way. You mentioned oceanography somewhere in there. What happened to that?
Yeah, I was wondering because when you sort of jotted down some things that you might be exploring, and I thought to myself, yeah, what was it with the oceanography? I did also at the age of 14. That was a busy year for me. I got my MOIS certificate for diving. So
Diving certificate.
and so scuba diving, and I learned to dive from a Navy diver who was a zealot. Uh, we had to do black water dives. We had to exchange equipment with blacked out masks, and he would sneak up behind you and turn off your air. And it was brutal. You had to swim the length of the pool underwater. You lined up a whole bunch of bolts and nuts, and you had to screw all the nuts together and then swim back to the other end of the pool all in one go. So
Oh,
it was interesting. So I got to be very comfortable in the water, and the first 2 years of university, I did do some stuff. I went to, I think it was Gabriel Island, to university UBC's oceanography thing. We did underwater plots. Water was so cold that by the time you got out, you couldn't undo the zipper on your wetsuit because your hands couldn't grip anything. it was that wasn't what put me off oceanography. I think I was always fascinated and interested, but I thought that it was more proximal to do forest ecology. Like I'd have more chance of actually getting somewhere. I might end up totally unemployed. As it turned out, when I graduated with a bachelor's degree, it was at a time when the government was really cutting back on foresters, and it became really hard to actually get a job in forestry, of all things. Like the first time in history in BC. And that which caused me ultimately just to say, you know what, I'm just going to go out east and do a master's degree. And
ah,
the influence of all of the three main characters in my master's program, the dean of graduate school, as well as two other foresters, were renowned in Canada. My thesis advisor ultimately became the assistant deputy minister of forests, and that's where I got to be right hand to the reallocation of Crown land in New Brunswick with information modeling, using the model that I developed in my undergrad, my thesis work for a graduate degree. So, so that led to all kinds of really good stuff and thinking and challenging, and actually also at a time when collaboration and system thinking rallied around a tangible model really made a difference. Like it could have been an incredibly adversarial thing for a government to say, we're running out of timber, we've been over harvesting this forest for 200 years. They have a big jump on BC. BC wasn't even discovered when they were yanking out giant spruce and pine for the King's Navy shipbuilding. So it could have gone bad when suddenly the government says, you guys are going to have to cut your allowable cut, maybe 40%. How are we going to do this? And rather than it becoming a complete free-for-all of cutthroat trying to make a case that somebody should have more than the other, they all saw the value of an open, transparent process of simulation modeling that could be translated to them in simple terms about how did it work, modeling the forest growth, and it was sensitive to the quality of their land. That was the beauty of this, as opposed to the pre-existing basic formulas approach. And with that background, then they collaborated. And we came to everybody at the end of the day, and these were the really big companies of the day, including Irving Company, felt that when they signed that they were getting a fair deal. And that left to this day a profound impression on me, even in the healthcare woes that we find ourselves in today. We somehow need to grasp at a much deeper level. We're getting some signs of light, but I still worry that we haven't got quite this common sense of purpose, and we haven't got agreement on the tools and the approach to meet that purpose yet. We've got little areas that are working and doing some things, but as a holistic thing, which will be where the real traction happens to get transformation, as opposed to twiddling the dials. I sort of feel like we're twiddling the dials right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, we don't have a common model for how improvement should happen. We don't have a model that people understand or that people trust, a trustable model. And because there's so much complexity, it is challenging to build that model. But
that's right.
There are so many frameworks that are available, and I know you've studied many of them. I wanted to go just finish off the stuff about your background, your origin story. Did you have a nickname growing up? It sounds like you were kind of an explorer. You're interested in so many things. Did your family call you anything?
Yeah, they only called me Billy.
That's it.
So yeah. So no, I didn't have any. There was nothing spectacular there. So yeah, no, I was just Billy, and then that really, as I got older, became like a major teenage liability. You felt. So I had to I always felt like I had to stamp out my nickname. And unfortunately, in this relatively small place and only one high school that covered most of the north at the time, that was hard to do because the people that you were in elementary school were right there in the same class with you.
Yeah. And aside from exploring the woods, going paddling with Grant, doing forest exploration, what were some of your hobbies?
Well, there's the diving that I mentioned. I didn't do too much in the way. I did quite a bit of skiing. I joined the ski patrol and for a while, and then I got kind of idealistic. It was the 70s, and I was already had a ecology bent, and I'm thinking about resources and fancy ski equipment and hills and all the rest of it. So I thought, cross country skiing is something that I should do. So there wasn't really much of a track in Prince George at the time. The current Otway track, which is national level right now, it's like amazing track in Prince George. But
What's it called? What's that track called?
Called Otway, the Otway Nordic Center.
Otway. Okay.
Yeah, because it's a little place on the railway that was named Otway. It's close to that. And anyway, in its fledgling form. And my dad went and put lights up by running extension cords, and so it even had a lit track up a hill around and back down. And one of Canada's Olympic cross-country skiers used to train there, and he gave me a few pointers as he went flying by. So again, advantage of a small community, you don't have to go far to bump into people that can really help you. And yeah, so I did quite a bit of that, and then when I went off to university, I continued diving for a while, and then I decided it's way too hard to be dragging tanks and things around. And so, in the same spirit that I gave up my downhill skis, I gave up all of that and stuck with snorkeling, which I continue to like to do today. But yeah, you can hold your breath and see an awful lot of stuff. You know, from my perspective, I don't need the tanks anymore.
Well, thank you for sharing those personal and beautiful memories with us. So you were doing a forestry. You started doing some modeling for forestry. So that's what your thesis was on, and then you actually got to have the rare experience of your thesis modeling actualized and applied in government with the deputy minister of forestry. How did you pivot from something spectacular like that and then find yourself into medicine?
Yeah, well, I have a few colleagues, one of whom I already mentioned, um, who were in med school while I was in forestry school at UBC. And we stayed in the same small residence on the Chancellor Boulevard side of the campus. And they would be studying their anatomy and stuff. And I'd be doing my forestry. I actually had to do wood anatomy when they were doing human anatomy. Big
I just
difference.
want to get clear, which university is this?
UBC.
At UBC. Okay.
My undergrad, yeah, for
Oh, yeah.
undergrad. And and actually there was a bit of a medical experience in our wood identification final exam when you have to cut a cross section to get a very fresh, sharp cross section of wood with a magnifying glass, and by looking at the phloem and the xylem pattern, you can figure out what species it is, right? So you got a timed exam at all these stations, including broken old pieces of a broom handle, that you have to figure out what the wood is. And somebody in their nervousness and urgency to get this thing done sliced their hand, and I think that they sliced their flexor tendon and had to be taken to the hospital.
Oh shit! You were in the room when this happened?
Yeah, so doing the exam. So I was watching medicine around and healthcare around me, but I had no desire whatsoever to do that. But I found it interesting. So I would actually sit in on some of their anatomy studying sessions, and just to sort of out of curiosity. And it was after working in the forestry for some time in New Brunswick that I suddenly got interested. I thought, you know what, I would like to do this, and I'd actually like to go into psychiatry, because I thought that would be a very human, interesting way to get connected to the human experience and help and learn about myself as well as others. You know, the old wounded healer thing. And yeah, so it didn't take me very long though in med school, or actually in clerkship, to realize that psychiatry was not for me, but that full service family medicine was for me. That came very apparent. But yeah,
Wow.
so that's sort of how I morphed through that whole forestry thing
Mm,
and migrated into healthcare.
I see. In the year 2000, I actually worked a little bit in forestry slash biotech. I was working um, in a lab doing a co-op session where I had to use microtomes to slice spruce cross sections for microscopy to visualize the vacuoles that were being produced with the we were testing the application of a substance called methyl jasmonate on spruce to see if it would protect against the beetle attacks.
Oh.
That was so that's something similar that I'd like to share. So you pivot into medicine. You mentioned something, the wounded healer thing. Are you open to commenting on what you meant by that?
Well, I wasn't, in any kind of mental health distress or issue, but I did notice that an awful lot of people around me were seeking not enlightenment. I wasn't that much the hippie, real hippie years are just before me. So I skipped that. Um, However, there was just this whole thing. I was interested in reading about. Oh man, I know some of the names. These famous names are slipping through my brain here. But anyway, just reading not the self-help books of the bestsellers of the day, but more around. This is my more biology, medical science, informatics library. I have another one around the corner of those kinds of things. And I was reading that stuff that got me thinking about psychiatry. But I very quickly learned that psychiatry was not about that so much. Sure, there's a flavor of it, but at that time, anyway, in the 80s, psychiatry was more of a medical management of mental illness, which was, of course, it's necessary, but it wasn't something that I felt attracted to go throw my whole heart and soul into.
Yeah, and you mentioned that uh, longitudinal or full service family medicine really resonated more with you. Who are some mentors that might have inspired you in your medical training time?
Sure. Well, the very first thing that struck me dramatically was a mandatory 1.5 weeks in memorial program to go to an outport. And you get to choose randomly and compete, not really compete because nobody really knew what number one and number two should be. Just put, So I thought New World Island sounded like a cool name. So I put my
I
name.
don't know where that is. Where is that?
Well, it's near Tullingate, so you've heard of the Newfie songs, Tullingate Round and Pogo and all that. It's very close to there. And so I went there, and the doctor, John Sheldon, who I believe may have just died recently. I hate to, rumors of somebody's deaths are greatly exaggerated, but I did read about him in the news just recently. I can't remember why, but he was the solo doctor there, and I had to follow him around and do everything. And one of the things that he woke me up one night. He said, "I've got a house call to do. We have to walk in, and you should come with me." So I did. So we waded through the snow up to our thighs to this house on a hill on the harbor, New World Island. It was near a road, but not on a road. And I went inside, and he said to go into the bedroom and take a history. And so I went in, and the woman that was there was in some distress, but not a huge amount. And she didn't have her dentures in, and I couldn't understand a word she said because at that time I hadn't fully got to the Newfie accent. So I came out totally bewildered. And because he said, "So what do you think's going on?" I said, "I have no idea. I don't even know which part of the body that's the problem." And so he took over, of course, and very quickly I was hammering a nail literally into the wall to hang an IV bag in. We had a big suitcase for rural house calls, and an ambulance was called. And I can't even remember. I can't think of how that happened because I'm sure this place had a phone, and nobody had cell phones in. But anyway, an ambulance came and took the woman away. But I just remember through the whole experience with this fellow how much he knew about families, how calm and insightful he was into the resources he had available and how to make them work. And I thought, this is really, really inspiring for me. How am I going to learn to do the same? And then Paul Patey, who was many times, or at least twice, I think, the president of the Canadian College of Family Physicians, and was an excellent preceptor as well in primary care. And there was a number of other people that were heavily involved in primary care at the time. So it was really almost a slam dunk for somebody to be shifted into that primary care track in undergraduate. So before you even hit the residency program, I had this experience. And you had mentioned once before about thinking, what would it take to sort of in med schools today to change things up that we might, we're got to be missing. Like, I haven't been in a med school, I haven't been a preceptor for some years now, but I do get a sense that we're missing that thread that I experienced in Newfoundland with these giants in the history of primary care in the country. and it's not modeled, I don't think, as much, because as a preceptor, I realized that the med students that were coming through were not getting the full experience. Sure, they were getting their clinical skills up. That's great. You have to do that. But when you're under fire and the waiting room's falling apart and you're rushing and trying to get all this stuff done, and they're in there for their short period of time and they leave and they did acquire some clinical skills experience. They're not getting that longitudinal experience like I got in New World Island as a first year med school who could barely understand which way the stethoscope should go in my ears. And so I think somehow we need to, in addition to the whole quality improvement and that aspect of how it's a lifetime experience of personal QI and QA.
That resonates a lot. Yeah.
Then I think there'd be more of a chance. Like even like I was the lead faculty in Prince George residency program for informatics and co-did the research stuff. And even with that program, the students were clear, the residents were clearly in that mode where this was a hoop I have to jump from out of to graduate, but it's not something it's not relevant for after that. Because they didn't see it around them, even in their whole residency program, in the busyness of a practice and the focus of a program and the mentorship and learning how to do all the basic stuff. A lot of that got lost. They didn't see their preceptors doing mini audits at lunch. Well, mine did, but because that was the geek guy who would do my 10-minute review of gap analysis for a chronic disease at lunch while I was eating a sandwich. Because that's what you can do it in 10 minutes, right? You can do a huge amount in 10 minutes when you have the technology. And back in the 90s, I had an EMR that could run all those reports, and I wrote them myself, and I could get them just like that.
Wow, you were really ahead of your time and your perspective. You know, that the perspective probably from your ecology background, that a systems perspective that you carried so early in your career probably was a big difference. And I agree with you. You know, I just looked up as you were speaking, Dr. Sheldon. This is him on the right here, yeah?
That's it. Yep.
Yeah, that's him. And the physician who took over from him, her name is Dr. Hewitt, I think, says, Dr. John Sheldon, New World Island doctor for more than 35 years. They summarize him as an acutely calm person. You use the word descriptor calm as well, Bill.
Yes.
A man who can deal with a psychotic crisis with his voice better than most drugs. What a beautiful statement.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan said, I guess Dr. Dan Hewitt, he says, it makes me tear up thinking of everything that John Sheldon has done. He knew what community engagement was before the term was invented. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah.
That's him. And yeah, it's amazing. And I did not read this article. I've never seen this article. But those words, like you say, echo what I was thinking. And that business about the community. Like he would sit down and tell me after about the third or the fourth depressed patient. And he said, I noticed that I was getting more requests for Valium and treatment and more complaints of depressive symptoms when TB came into New World Island. And he said, I saw what was happening. When people used to go and play cards and crib and chat and in their various houses, like visiting, and when the TV came, they had TV dinners and they watched TV in the evening as a family, but not as a community.
Yeah. So even that shift in community, that there's a disconnection, a false substitute for human connection in that box in the TV, because he could see the impact of that on community. Wow, community health. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also briefly looked up Dr. Patey, Paul Patey, and this article just from last year came up. A quick thinking doctor with a drill saved a man's life. So I'm guessing this was this boy named Taylor. He needed a craniotomy or something, maybe
Yeah.
from injury or bleed. Did you see this one?
No, I haven't seen that.
Oh yeah. So it looks like Dr. Paul Patey holding up a drill that he used to bore a hole in the head.
Hmm.
Oh my goodness. So, oh, that's him. Yeah.
That's him.
Yeah.
Now he would give us videos. He wasn't in them all, but he commissioned their creation for doing interviews. And back before it was in vogue or even proven by science, which it has been, he would tell us you got to refrain from talking other than introducing yourself. As soon as you start the functional inquiry, you're done. You've got to do it, and I can feel the skill that you have in doing this. Like it doesn't take too much of a stretch of my imagination to imagine how you would be interviewing a patient, and that is you set the stage, and then you get them to say everything, and now we know scientifically that by doing that, you get a much more comprehensive, accurate history than you do by peppering people with any headache, any sore throat, any blah, 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 right? Get the story out first and then fill in those necessary details that you need what's left. And actually, precious little is left after you do it right, right? And he showed videos of us. And again, in second year med school, that's the time to be witnessing these things. That's what's getting your brain going from the beginning. Because even by third and fourth year, you're shot. If that hasn't penetrated your mind, then you're not gonna. It's not going to be as seamless. It's not going to come from within you as you're doing your daily work.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. The modern kind of popular psychology terminology for that methodology is called just holding space or
Yeah,
creating space containers for,
that's right.
yeah, for the patient to reveal to us the diagnosis. Yeah. Mm,
Well, just one thing that is still maybe hopefully part of your mental script. Um, and this is to do with what can we encourage, what can we have that we had in the past that may inform us how we can do better today, right? And in that spirit, I feel like I had the luckiest career that anybody could possibly have because everywhere I went in forestry, Vladimir Kraina, former curator of the Botanical Museum in Hawaii, was the father of forest ecology in this province. I got to be in his classes. I was in David Suzuki was there doing genetics. People would take
wow.
people would take. I think he's still alive, and maybe you'll see this. I don't know. He stumbled on it randomly, but people would take another person's genetics course because it was to take that other person's exam, but not go to that person's lecture. They would go to David Suzuki's lecture because they would learn so much in the lectures, but they knew they would flunk his exam, which were open-ended, no time. You could stay there as long as you want, but it didn't help to stay there as long as you want, unless you really knew the stuff, right? So these characters all the way through, like it didn't. My first year university, it started sort of this being exposed to these people. And it was the same in medicine. In addition to Gordon Baskerville and Gordon Wheatman and all these people I was mentioning before in the forestry side of things, who were nationally known, internationally known, actually. Then I get into medicine. Guess who my second year renal prof was? Nephrology.
I don't know.
GALT, the GALT formula.
Oh my gosh, the guy who invented the calculation. Oh my God.
my, my pediatrics professors were the head of the Canadian Tropical Medicine Society, and they set up the med school in Nairobi for East Africa, and were related to and have been involved, I think, in the ROGAM journey, the journey to discovering and implementing ROGAM with Jack Bowman and others. When I could go on and on. Marshall, who's one of the fathers of the complement pathway, was my immunology professor. I won't go list them, but it's huge. The exposure that I had, and it was by no doing on my own. Like I didn't have this clairvoyant feeling, oh, I'm going to Memorial because there's all these famous people. They just were there. And then the same in Manitoba with Frank Plummer doing all that original HIV work. And because of the pediatricians that I mentioned in Newfoundland, I went and worked in Kenya at the time when Frank Plummer in Manitoba, which I later went to, was doing the original research on the streets of Nairobi on HIV. And then when I actually was in Manitoba, my obstetrics prof was the guy who did the biophysical profile. There's also Frank, the Manning, no, Frank. Anyway, the guy who invented non-stress tests, the guru of non-stress tests in obstetrics. So on and on through these exposures, and then subsequently in healthcare, meeting so many people in the informatics world, from Lawrence Weed, the father of the problem-oriented record, who had great visions of what that problem-oriented record could do for healthcare. All these giants in history, Stan Huff from Intermountain Health, and all the great informatics work he did with clinical detailed modeling, and how Don Berwick, who also was when I was in Salt Lake City talking with Don Berwick and Stan Huff's office just down the way, we're talking about how they did all of their IT, 120 different applications that ran their system that had them accounting for every 15 minutes of activity with minimal effort, so that they could then understand what the system was doing so that they could improve it and monitor it and so on. So those experiences are priceless. And I don't know how we can recapitulate that in the modern era, but we need somehow to bring those, if not those actual kinds of characters, that kind of experience, that you are exposed to people that are really thoughtful and doing specific things that are not just the good clinical skills and the excellent surgery and yeah, we got to do that too. And you very nicely said, like, how do we do this? There's so little time. We're already jammed. How do we fit this in? I don't know how we fit it in, but I'm just saying that I think the richness that it adds will change, I think, the character of how we feel when we practice, diminish burnout, increase resilience, and most of all, help us find solutions to the very serious problems that we're facing now.
What I'm hearing from you is that exposure to, teachers and mentors full of passion and really connected to purpose is infectious and inspiring, and that it was simply Providence that put you in that path to meet all these giants in each of their respective fields. And you're acknowledging the privilege that you had in this journey, and you're wishing that for everybody who's coming after you. And yeah, what amazing. And I that resonates with me. It is the mentors, it is the privilege of the mentorship and the inspiration that we get from being with someone who has the vision that is larger, and the perspective that is bigger. That's very inspiring. And I think through digital sources, we try to give those experiences, even through podcasts like this, maybe, but it's not the same. It's not the same as being in person with them, being in the field with them, and walking beside them as you learn, and as they show you, and as they, with compassion, guide you and try to teach you. Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is that developing mentorship relationships is something, and especially ones that cross silos, like a longitudinal family physician might or has, and historically, just really widening perspective would be really helpful.
Yeah, that's it's a dream, and I'm sure it happens to some degrees in pockets, but the trick is, like everything that we try to do in healthcare, is how do you routinize it so that it just becomes more consistent and more available.
Routinize, yeah. How do you build it, embed it into the processes of education?
Right.
Were there anything is there anything else that stands out to you as what you know to that might be 2024 medical education and medical education when you took it, which was maybe the 80s?
Yes, it was. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it was definitely the 80s. Yeah, beginning of the
Yeah.
80s. Yeah.
What else
Mm.
stands out to you as large contrasts?
Yeah. That I think those things that we just covered are the big ones. Now on the positive side, the availability of the technology and the informatics at that time was minimal. So now maybe that allowed our brains to be more flexible. Like I've always been fascinated with how do Inuit people back before there was courses or whatever online, no online at all, figured out how to completely strip down a snowmobile and fix it and put it back together again, right? Because there's
That's true.
so and being creative and resourceful, which you have to be when you're not distracted by a lot of stuff. So that it makes me think around how do we do all of this QI with modeling and system design thinking and all the rest of it without being so consumed in the process of doing all of that that we're not alert and watching what's going around us. As somebody who figures out how to fix a snowmobile with no resources. So in other words, how do we keep the creative spirit, the daily sentience of your context, but at the same time introduce these other ways of working that were not possible. When I was in John Sheldon's office, there was no way to find out about who were my diabetics who needed something. I mean, that's a pretty almost trite kind of thing now because it should be so easy to do. It's like picking up a stethoscope, which will become, of course, very quickly a thing of the past too, right? You and I with a stethoscope are going to be looked at as, oh yeah, you used to use one of those things.
Yeah, it's all going the way of the portable ultrasound, right?
Exactly. We just use our phone. Hey, yeah. So that's it's just something to think of, and they so we have an opportunity to do things so much differently. So because I'm not stuck on the past trying to say, hey, we did it this way. So quite the opposite. I'm seeing the things that were really done well, like what was represented by John Sheldon. But now with the technological capability of a truly interoperable record that substantially reduces our administrative burden and gives us the insight that Lawrence Weed in the 60s, the soap note, Lawrence Weed was the father of the soap note, but there was way more to Lawrence Weed than the soap note. That was just a tiny tool on the journey to an effective problem-oriented record, which would be effectively linking all the things that you need to know. Now, imagine if you're in your digital health record that you're working with, that as you're looking at a problem list, that it's easy for you to see every order that you have written in the last 3 months related to that problem, the most recent value for the relevant observation for the severity or the status of that problem, like say frailty score, the the community of the Dartmouth frailty score. There's a bit of a whether you use the study on the human aging or the Dartmouth thing, moot point, or the congestive heart failure or the heart failure New York score. So those what brought the appropriate observation that you would be putting in your chart is brought forward to you to see the orders, to see the drugs and all that sort of stuff. That was Lawrence Weed's vision in the 60s before there was computers that could do that. But he felt that though we could at least be thinking and writing and organizing our charts so that we could do that. And now it's easy, dead easy to do all of what I just said in an electronic medical record and to be prompted for so much stuff and to be able to have prescriptions done in 3 clicks that are dead accurate because we have the Canadian classification of drugs database that has non-proprietary products, which one of the tasks that I've done in my standards work here recently is I've mapped the form and the route for all 4,600 and some odd non-proprietary therapeutic products in Canada, which would be comprise about 95% of what a family physician or would order, or even a consultant in the community. And it's just done and coded so with just a few clicks. And I'll, by the way, tell you the min and the max price for it too on the side, all in an instant. Like, yeah, so
Wow. Wow.
so none of what I'm just saying is an original thought. It's talking to people like Lawrence Weed, reading and digesting that, reading being part of the informatics movement that has many of these components been long thought of, but we need that common vision to get there. On all parties, we're getting more and more things where people can sit down and design a new funding model, and we can do bits, and we've got some things happening with digital health. But I'm still seeing a huge gap in the global possibility or the overarching intertwined possibilities that are there for us to build and get to sooner than later. Instead of, like I said at the start of this conversation, 1980s building a subset that I'm still working on that can be deployed for socioeconomic determinants of health.
Yeah.
Or it can be deployed, and it is already existent in that EMR that I handed over, but it's not a pan-Canadian standard, and it's not in all EMRs in the country.
Wow. I always appreciate whenever you speak about social determinants of health. And now with this conversation, I kind of understand your perspective of really understanding the interdependencies within the entire life cycle and the community cycle. So I appreciate that. As you were speaking, I looked up Lawrence Weed's work, and this quote stood out to me. It's important to understand that the discipline imposed by the patient-oriented medical record has not been fully embraced. Too often, the patient-oriented medical record is sporadically employed as a convenience and not consistently enforced as a discipline. One reason is that medical education is fundamentally incompatible with the underlying philosophy of the patient-oriented medical record. Medical education seeks to instill medical knowledge and clinical judgment. In doing so, medical schools give students a misplaced faith in the completeness and the accuracy of their own personal store of medical knowledge, and a misplaced faith in the completeness and accuracy of the efficacy of their own intellects. What is done to students in medical school is the antithesis of a truly scientific education. Wow.
Absolutely. And I think, as you're reading it, that's what we've been talking about. It's exactly what I was saying. I'm hoping we can somehow thread into the medical training at all levels, starting from the very first year of med school, all the way through into your lifelong learning, in your journey to go from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence, right?
Yeah, there's a humility in there that Lawrence Weed is speaking to, an understanding that our intellect is limited, but that we have the opportunity with all the electronic medical records and other software that holds data to guide our decision making and our ability to integrate that as a discipline into all of our decision making, individual level as well as the population level. Speaking of which, you and I, we did meet more through the Health Data Coalition. What is your origin story? How did you get involved with the Health Data Coalition?
Yeah, so that is very interesting journey. And when I was thinking about it, how did that really play out? Well, in the primary care transition fund days of the early 2000s, there was a lot of work done on collaboratives for chronic disease and stuff like that, right? We had the chronic disease management toolkit implemented in the province somewhere around 2004, and which, by the way, was an unfortunate timing because it was implemented at a time that it became a barrier to electronic medical records, not an assist, right? And fostered a unidimensional, let's all get together and figure out how to do diabetes. And then when we're finished with that, you can do another module and figure out what to do with chronic obstructive lung disease. but not anywhere during that time to figure out what is the general approach to chronic disease in general. And shouldn't we be looking at diabetes as just an example of that, but what's the cross paradigm? So that when you figure out your diabetes right, because you sure have your medical knowledge to do how to manage heart failure and how to manage COPD and things like that, that all the rest would fall into place. So in my medical record creating journey, I built all the chronic disease modules so that people could upload and not even touch the toolkit, interface with it, and so on and so forth. But you couldn't get meaningful data. You could get charts and stuff out of it, but you couldn't do stuff that you could work on right in your practice to find gaps in care and do it really efficiently without this really cumbersome process. So I wrote a few reports that eventually became what we call the scorecard, but in the spirit of enterprise architecture scorecard, not a school scorecard that, you got to do this scorecard and get A's or you're going to get beaten, that sort of thing. And then one thing led to another, that with permission, I was generating scorecards pretty quickly because it was all digital, but with my remote access, suddenly 40 practices or clinics in the north had aggregated data with all of the run charts for chronic disease and a whole host of screening, their age, gender pyramid, all of that stuff. And then I would hand deliver it as aggregates so that it wouldn't cause any problem with privacy. And eventually, when it got to 40 clinics, I can't keep doing this every quarter. I wrote as much as I could possibly do to make it go fast, but the next step was going to be something that I didn't have the time for, still being in practice. So that was where, along coincidentally, came the notion of a $1 million grant that was offered via Northern Health to the university to build some form of a database. And the idea was at that time, was actually to build a cancer database. And they asked me as CMIO at the time to give some advice as to how should we do this. And my first advice was, don't do the cancer database. This is too big. You're going to go off and it's going to be a mess. It's going to be a data bank for the province. There needs to be a different venue to start that. But there is a way that we could get a window meaningfully into cancer and a whole host of other things, like everything in that scorecard I mentioned. If we could build a database that could aggregate primary care data in a distributed way, not bring a honeypot of patient data into big servers, but still be under the custodianship of all the practices. And then we would generate all these measures. At that time, I was getting close to 120. And so that happened. We built it. We built it at UNBC with some programmers, and I led the development of that. And we implemented it. And within 2 years, we had covered 2/3 of the North. We had 2/3 of the population of the North with 120 different measures that physicians could look at online and compare themselves with other practices and not worry that anybody else could see how their practice data was evolving unless they invited them to be their data friend. And word got out about that at the same time that people were also thinking about distributed thing in the divisions of family practice. And when we presented this at a division meeting, I think there was some big interest in doing this provincially, and we wanted to do it provincially.
What year was this, Bill? What year was it?
2010. 2011.
Oh, so divisions were just starting.
Yeah. So 2011, we built our called AmCare for Aggregated Metrics for Clinical Analysis, Research, and Evaluation. It was like a lame name, but I wanted to call it CAMRA, Clinical Analysis. Anyway, but that was stolen by the Craft Beer Association in the UK, which I really wanted to become a member of. When I found about that, I said, "There's a Craft Beer Association. Sign me up."
You gotta partner. You gotta do some partnering.
That's right. It sounds a lot better than AmCare. But so then we wanted AmCare. We built our servers at UNBC to be able to handle the whole province, and we were even naive thinking the whole country eventually, because we had some of the best IT guys up there involved in this. And so anyway, the division movement got on, but I kind of wanted to do it in parallel. There wasn't really much interest in sort of throwing the hat in to say, okay, let's go from where you are now and make this go provincial and have a broader governance. So
And
the
just
position that,
for for the listeners, the divisions is the divisions of family practice, which is like a geographic specific community bases for primary care physicians and now nurse practitioners occasionally to join forces and to come together for learning and collaboration. And there are, I think, over 70 different divisions in the province. Do you know how many divisions are in British Columbia?
yeah, well, there used to be around 45, but that
Oh,
I'm a bit out of touch with it, so there could be more.
it's
Yeah.
probably around the same. It's probably still around 50. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Bill. I just want to
No
make sure
worries.
that the
No.
listeners knew
Yeah,
what we were talking
level set. I'm talking about divisions, and they're thinking, what's the military got to do with this? But
about.
yeah. Um, so then the position Data Collaborative was formed as a nonprofit, and myself and a few others from the AmCare days were on the board of that, and stuff was being done. Um, it got to be a little bit challenging because the idea of extending this beyond into being able to support health system design and improvement in a safe way for physicians was a bit of a tough sell. It was funded entirely by the divisions, and they had to fork over some of their cash to make all of this happen. And we could see that that wasn't going to be very sustainable. And there were some technical issues that are kind of complicated. We won't need to get into that. But so a bunch of us decided that maybe we should just, in the interest of level setting the whole playing field, why don't we just start a new nonprofit? We will throw in all the assets of AmCare into this, all the code, the way the graphs work, and all the rest of it. Everything that the PDC had done, throw that in. And then and the name came up, Health Data Coalition, because it truly was a coalition that transcended divisions. It was family practice. It didn't involve government directly, but it was able to achieve government funding through the GPSC, now FBC, the Family Practice Services Committee. And so that was in about 2017 or 16. I'm a bit fuzzy on the exact year. Maybe actually could have been the 15 that we actually formed the nonprofit Health Data Coalition. I remained on the board for long enough for that to get established and get an infrastructure, and then decided that I would be better serving the organization to be a medical director. And that's when you met me, when I was a medical director, following up on that.
Yes, yes. Wow. Um, you know, you brought a vision to it, and you have a very unique background with computer science knowledge and software development knowledge. If if there are physicians out there who want to contribute to this space of meaningfully using technology and software to assist healthcare, are there any training programs that have caught your eye and you're like, oh, that would be great? Or maybe a training program that you've done that you would recommend physicians or non-physicians who really want to help in this space to take? Is there anything that stands out to you in the field?
Well, I get asked that actually fairly often, and I'm always stumped. I don't know how, especially a physician who's already busy and like, what do you take? Like, there's a number of different courses that probably would be helpful. There's always an informatics course of some sort available to physicians through McMaster. There's various other organizations that offer them. An obstetrician in Prince George, it kept going around. He was quite funny. He was from South America, and he would say in a Spanish accent, he says, "I'm an Oxford man." he got an Oxford degree in informatics, and why he did that, I have no idea. I mean, he was interested in computers, and he was a very good and busy obstetrician. But anyway, he and I think it was a good course. He got to learn some stuff. But my experience is that the twists and turns on this are so great that it's almost an experiential thing. And what you need to know more is somehow there needs to be a course, and I'm not sure one exists, of what are the points of informatics that are really important, from terminology to information, health information structures, to system design, enterprise architecture, which is another thing that that I've been very fortunate to get heavily involved with respect to the healthcare space as one of the first implementations of a formal enterprise architecture approach through Leading Practice, which is a consortium of 120 universities around the world trying to synthesize the best of enterprise architecture. And they've been very successful at doing that for shipping, for banking, for a whole host of other things. And they were very excited to get us involved in the North on doing that for healthcare. So those are skills that you kind of pull all this together. So it's information technology, yes. Healthcare and all of its nuances, from everything I learned from John Sheldon, yes. You got to know QI. So the courses in QI are available now, and that's really good. But for me, they're insufficient to do the full scope. Like if you want to do QI in your practice, absolutely, that's the best way to start. You can experientially actually become get very good at it. But if you want to be at that space where you're trying to alter the system and build components for the system, you need these other points that I was mentioning, right? And so maybe that means doing the QI courses, means taking a course in enterprise architecture that's understandable, because it can get very esoteric and practically unusable if you're not careful. And where do I get about terminologies? When Dennis Proddy was at University of Victoria with the informatics program there was opportunities. It probably still is. I'm just dating myself with the giants that have been involved with that in the past. But so I guess the short answer would be do some reading because they're in the absence of, or contact me. I don't know. I'm pretty confident that's not going to cause a flood of messages.
You have a good assessment of the audienceship of this program.
If I get a message, I'll let you know. You can plot it.
Yeah, I would love that.
But yeah, to get the lay of the land of these components and then systematically go through at your convenience and with interest. And most importantly, put it to some good use. Get involved with something. QI is getting easier and easier with what's going on in the province here as well. Get involved in some of these webinars with Doctors of BC, say on the current interest in the International Patient Summary, and get some exposure to International Patient Summary. Is actually a phenomenal place to be thinking about stuff, because it's imminently practical in your practice today if we had a way to do it uniformly across the province. We built something with specialist services funding in the North in 2012, and it's now fully interoperable with Cerner, PowerCharge in the North, and it would be fully interoperable with the Gateway through the CDX system if that was if that system was chosen to be still.
Can I slow you down here, Bill? So you said something was fully interoperable with. Say it again.
Oh, so yeah, so we in 2012 we took an evidence-based. We had a project with physician focus groups to look at care planning and clinical summaries and what would be ideal to be sharing from a primary care comprehensive holistic care plan, as well as be a framework for plans of care that specialists like cardiologists, like physiotherapists, like occupational, whatever, they all have plans of care for specific things that they're working on. But primary care's job is to orchestrate all of this, be the conductor, as it were, and understand and synthesize it into a holistic thing. And so we built the standards that were available globally. And we built it into MOIS. And then it was possible to automatically coalesce your problem list, your allergies, the last three. You could specify for this patient, what's of interest is the last three hemoglobin A1Cs, this particular seminal consultation on their heart failure, what have you. And then that would automatically be incorporated into a clinical summary. And then we built a way to copy paste it into PowerChart for while we were waiting for an interoperable way to do it, which arrived in the form of the clinical document exchange system called CDX in the province. It was meant to be the provincial way of moving stuff around in 2014 when it went live.
Can you remind me what PowerChart is?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, geez. That's the health authority's clinical system using Cerner.
Okay, so I think many people have heard of Cerner, a big EMR system. The health authority is Northern Health in this context, right? And they have a version of Cerner that's called PowerChart,
Well,
or
PowerChart is Cerner everywhere in the world. The main core of Cerner's electronic health record is PowerChart, and then they have things like SurgeonNet and FirstNet and all these things that bolt onto it to
got it.
expand into the emergency space, into the surgical space, into the home care space, and all kinds of stuff. There's all these modules, but the core is called PowerChart.
And was it with that group that you mentioned earlier, the 120 universities coming together to talk about standards? Is that where this standard was developed?
No,
Oh no.
no, because that's a architectural approach to solve problems of any sort, or health systems and design. It's this thing that's behind almost every Fortune 500 company, enterprise architecture, and and I actually got to meet and co-present with John Zachman, the Zachman framework fame. It was one of the original things that the airline industry and everything took off with. Um, and so that's the structure. The health information standards that went into this were built around what's called Health Level 7, HL7 standard. Their RIM model, that's the one, HL7. And before fire, this is almost like Neanderthal times, right? Before fire, there was a thing called the clinical document architecture, which is very mature and still is the backbone for interoperability in most of the OECD countries. Like the US in particular, it's probably 90% of the healthcare exchanges are in CDA because they were doing this before fire was even level 0. And so what we did, I appealed in 2009. It took from 2009 to 2014 to get a working system using clinical document architecture, CDA standard, which nicely supports a comprehensive care plan using the model, which is being reused in the fire development. So it's not like this is way off in left field stuff. It's just all part of a momentum. So what we did was built the ability for any vendor to communicate with any other vendor any kind of document. Every month in BC, there are thousands of e-referrals happening between GPs and specialists, and the consult coming back electronically through a global standard.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's only with mostly in the north, but not exclusively. There are other people that are adherent to this. It does now involve at least 3 or 4 of the vendors that can exchange, but some of them can only receive. Only a few can do bidirectional, and MOIS and Cerner can do the bidirectional piece. And because they can do the bidirectional piece, it's not because it was some custom thing in the north. This is following exactly the same standard that in the US today, that the clinical summary is passed through the meaningful use legislation. The vendors in the US must do this by legislation in the US, and they've been doing it since their early 2010, 2011, that area. And now we're doing that. And I'm hoping that somebody will learn from the lessons that we have from over 10 years of exchanging clinical summaries, care plan, having a standardized based way of using it. There is a way to translate all this to FHIR. That's almost like a trivial part of the whole exercise. The most important part of the exercise was getting the clinical agreement on the components and how they would be represented. So problem list, allergy, or adverse reaction risk and medications is a no-brainer. However, you know from your experience with the Health Data Coalition that MedList deployments within various EMRs is very variable. We have a huge amount of work to make that standardized within the EMR such that a confident medication list can be exchanged or shared and not derived by some loose logic with prescribing and saying, oh yeah, this one seems to be long-term and this one seems to have been episodic, that issue that we got into with the Health Data Coalition and trying to get meaningful drug measures, to the extent that we changed it all to focus on prescribing, not on what people are really on and meant to be on continuously.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so we had that standardized way with this CDX system exchanging a CDA message, not fully structured. That was really disappointing for me that I thought that by 2018 we'd have fully CDA level 3, like the fully specified structured information of a problem list and allergy list, med list, and what have you, social history, procedures, the whole 9 yards. Our BC standard covers it, and we had tremendously knowledgeable people working on that. We had a person who won the HL7 Global Award for her participations in HL7 as our advisor in BC. PETO adopted that as the base standard, and they invested in Gordon Point Informatics, which became another, morphed into a very large national IT company or informatics health information standards outfit.
For the listeners, PETO stands for
Physician Information Technology Office.
Ah, that's right. And then
Yes.
so they adopted HL7. Yeah.
This CDA standard, yep. And we took our BC standard that Northern Health and Interior Health worked so hard to build. It's about 150 pages. And the BC standard is actually 100% compliant with the Canadian standard of Canada Health Infoway. PETO had built one. We merged it. We found there was 95% overlap. And within a few meetings, we were able to reconcile the 5% differences into one global thing that is still published now. I think the most recent version is 2016 or 2017. And that enables all the components of a record.
If someone wanted to look up what that was, what would they type into the Google machine?
I think if you just typed in CDA BC, you might just get it right on the first hit.
Your first hit is certified dental assistants of
BC. Okay. HL7 then. Throw in HL7. I'm going to do then.
All right.
I got to catch up with you.
Oh, there it is. BC CDA implementation guide.
Yep, that's the one.
So this is what comes up. And this the BC CDA implementation guide version 4, published in last updated in 2016. So this talks about HL7, IHE, SNOMED, and LOINC. Okay, you got the authors here. Maintenance comments. So who should be reading this? Is it someone who's deciding to develop an EMR should be reading this, or who needs to be with this?
I don't know whether anybody needs to read this at this point. I mean, we're moving to FHIR. If you're a vendor now, and I'm hearing that even today, vendors are signing on to the CDX system, so they will need to know CDA. People who are currently involved with anything that has CDA will be able to translate that to FHIR very, very quickly and easily. And in fact, the International Patient Summary and the ISO standard for the patient summary is with FHIR spec and CDA spec. It's bilingual.
Was that ISO 13360 or something?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
You're getting there, man! Wow.
you told me that one day when we were on Blanchard Street in Victoria, and I never forgot it because I was like, "What is this?" I just want to slow down a little bit for the listeners. CDX is Clinical Document Exchange. Yeah.
Yep.
This is something that was built, again, Northern and Interior Health combined their forces with yourself and some other folks to develop this kind of a common, is it a common, like a database? How do you describe it so that people can transfer documents between softwares?
It's the highway to, with the standard to exchange. So, and it was meant to be provincial. I used to be on what was originally the CIO Council, that morphed into being called all various names, including EMITSC and other things, but it was the IMIT Steering Committee for the province. And the idea was that this would become the Canadian or the BC standard with all apps, and the health authorities, like in Northern Health, all clinical documents that are generated by Northern Health in any facility is distributed through the CDX system into EMRs.
And I heard you said you were kind of like heartbroken that this is no longer going to be the way that it's being scrapped, right? And it's going to be replaced by something.
Yeah, it's not so much being heartbroken about being scrapped, because recognizing there's been so much time lost since we went live in 2014 when you would not be able to do a fire thing, and the skill set of building to the CDA standard, which is standardized and follows a model and covers all the bases, as you could see from very comprehensive work that was done on that, and global experience, would have given us a leg up, so that right now we would be quickly building fire components and eventually retire CDA. Although there are some elements that I would love to maybe see a way of testable documents. We're getting way too deep into this, but if we can stimulate somebody just thinking like, what the hell is that? Well, then I guess that's a success. But
Yes.
the one thing about CDA that it does very, very nicely is bundles all that stuff up in very simple, human readable, machine parsable, standardized, global standards, all in one nice package that's signed, sealed, and delivered and attested by an author. So for example, the way we built the care plan exchange from an EMR, so with one click and selecting power chart instead of Dr. X and Dr. Y that you're doing your e-referrals to, you just pick Northern Health power chart and you hit send for that care plan. The receiving system will not accept it unless it is attested by a physician. So if the MOA does it, it bounces. So it has to, you need to be able to see that this was reviewed by a physician. Otherwise, you won't have confidence in it. If you have a person shouting out to their MOA, hey, would you send up Mrs. So-and-so's care plan to Care Connect? What will happen, and it's happened around the world, is that incomplete problem list and med list and non-reviewed stuff will end up there. And then people are going to look at it at 2 a.m. and then wonder, can I trust this? And so we know from the experience of the spine and the personal health record in the first phase in the UK, that's exactly what happened. And that's what's happening today after billions of expenditure in Australia. With confidence in what you're seeing is you're not sure. So what we tried to do is figure out ways to ensure that the confidence was as high as it could be, but the ease of updating straight from your EMR by just quickly reviewing the med list and the problem list and a few things, hitting one button and bam, it's gone. Along with all the stuff that you've specified in your clinical summary rules for that patient. Yeah, that's the way I think that we just want to see this happening, right? So CDA is just a tool that is now on its last legs. The CDX system is not. I still wonder why it's not used as the highway for anything that's going on today, because we built that highway. I liken the CDX system to being like the road system in the 1920s after the Model T was formed. Somebody had the bright idea that they need to put a lot of energy into the road system so that these newfangled vehicles would be able to get around. And the road system doesn't care what's, by and large, what's on it. As long as it's wide enough for vehicles to pass and people don't sink into the mud, and that when they hit intersections, they don't collide, you're done. You can go on a holiday, you can transport mail, you can do whatever you want in those highways. Keep it regulated, of course. But so that's what the idea was behind CDX, including the distribution mechanism to say not only that we want to send from, I want to send to Dr. So-and-so who works at this clinic 3 days a week, and that's where I want him to get this, as opposed to the clinic that he works at 2 days a week, or the other one that he works on weekends on or near the street. You see what I mean? So we built the distribution engine so everybody could specify their locations, and then not only that, the team could specify their location. So you can send it to Primary Care Team 1, Prince George, and it will get to the organizational role in charge of that team without having to worry about people moving around within the health authority and getting seconded over here or whatever. It gets to an organization. All that's built. It's kind of like the mail system and the roads to deliver the mail built. Now, the standard that we put on there is, for now, or up till now, has been the CDA standard. But it doesn't stop a fire message from passing. And it doesn't preclude that central broker that manages all this stuff in the middle is vital. It even detects when somebody's not picking up their mail. And I got called into that a number of times. In fact, I would go and scan that every once in a while and look at it and say, wait a minute, somebody hasn't, their system's been down for 3 days and they don't know it. And I would personally get on the call and call the clinic and talk to the clinic manager and say, do you know that your EMR is not picking up mail? And then one time a physician had retired and he'd hired somebody to look after the billing. His EMR was continuing to pick up results, but they were not being redistributed somewhere else. So I was able to call them and sort that out to make sure that people actually got the results. So there's safety valves that can be built into how we run our systems if you design it right. And so I have no delusions that CDX as it exists today is the way to go into the future. But I would hope that we would have it set up so that people could learn from that experience. Both the content, the international patient summary content, how that went, all those focus groups, how the standards support those components, and so on and so forth.
So CDX works because of CDA, yeah?
CDX is a conduit for CDA documents. It could be a conduit for fire documents. It could be a conduit for almost anything, really. You can push plain text through it if you wanted to.
And CDA stands for clinical data.
CDA stands for clinical document architecture.
Document
architecture. And it was invented in the year or deployed first, I think, around 2000. One of the leading champions of CDA, sorry, was a guy by the name of Robert Dolan, whom I've also met and chatted with. God, like I just, I can't stand it. It's
you've gone on the founder circuit. You've gone on the circuit of the founder.
Well, I still remember it was in New Orleans, and I was talking to Rob Dolan, and I was asking him for advice about our CDA aspirations, and he said, don't bother with CDA level 2 and 3, which gets you into the full structured. He said, start right away with CDA level 1 to get stuff moving. And once things are moving, you can get vendors to crank it up and start putting sections in, and then start putting in detailed of every lab test and every drug and every medical imaging report. The other thing that he pointed out, and is still valid today, is the templating, that we agree on common templates. So I'm walking through at another event, and it was a showcase of interoperability in the US. So it's the annual HIMSS thing, and people come, thousands of people come. And I'm walking, and I went by and I saw a consult and a referral on these two huge screens, and they looked identical to a BC e-referral and an e-consultation. The color was the same, the fonts were the same, everything's organized the same. I'm like, Jesus, somebody brought CDX here. They're demonstrating CDX. I didn't know about this. So I go over, and then the template that the Americans were using, and probably the Australians too, was identical to the template that we adopted. So not only is this standard in BC, it's a standard that would be national, and it would be US, so it's an international standard. So even if you were a physician receiving an e-referral in the US, it would look identical to the one that you just got 2 weeks before in BC.
Wow. Yeah, so I can see the value of the interoperability enablement that would come from things like this. How do I differentiate FIRE from CDA?
Good question. So FIRE is a different paradigm in that, how to describe this? So the clinical document is informed by a very formal model, which many people, including myself, have argued was too complex. And it translates messages into what essentially is XML. It's the standard in the world in the web. So it is human readable, and it's parsable through standard XML stuff. And it rolls up all those sections to the standard you just scrolled through very quickly. FHIR is a way of breaking things up into chunks called resources and being able to mix and match resources according to rules. And so that you can have a message resource, and that's how you would send a message for an order, and you would embed an order resource into that, and maybe a questionnaire resource into that too, so that specialists could specify what ticky boxes essentially they want you to fill in for this referral. And so you got all these things that you can put together, and you can go and you can go to a middleware thing, like the equivalent of the CDX core distribution thing. And the middle then processes the messages and forwards them on and provides some value add to those messages. And like sending a message to the patient, that's what Oceanography that's been implemented in BC does. And you can link a PDF file to it in the FHIR world as a linked resource or a linked item. The problem is, yeah, there's a lot of power here, a lot of flexibility, but there's a huge amount of ability to dumb everything down, and at the end of the day, still be transporting PDF files. And that's not what we want. Transmitting a PDF is like a fax, really. It's just a more sophisticated way of getting the fax more securely to its end destination with a header. Sure, we got that value add. CDA, I'm being honest, CDA level 1 is roughly equivalent to that. It's just that it's a thoroughbred under the hood. And it's just sent out a donkey with, because we want the vendors, we don't want the vendors to all have to know how to handle thoroughbreds, but all at once. So FHIR is a more sophisticated way of the interactions and how you can be pinging back and forth between these so-called endpoints and mixing and matching and filing bundles. But it is important to recognize that there's many a cup between the cup and the, or slip between the cup and the lip on how you implement this, and you can have unintended consequences. You can make things either overly complex or not complex enough, like essentially boiling down to a PDF exchange if you're not careful.
Mm.
The other thing that this is now getting maybe a little too esoteric, but I think it's important. It's one of the important points on anybody's journey to understanding informatics, and that is the absolute vital importance of information modeling and detailed clinical information modeling. So OpenEHR, which is a world thing, it's formed ISO 13606. In fact, that's derived from OpenEHR. OpenEHR started as GEHR in France, the Good Electronic Health Record, and was moved to Australia in the 2000s. I went to the OpenEHR offices in Adelaide and Sydney in 2006 in a bid to try to get an OpenEHR standard going in Canada. That didn't go very far, but it was a very interesting journey to a very important component of our knowledge about documents. And what OpenEHR is like enterprise architecture. It's a model of how information about health is stored. But the good news, or the really interesting thing is, it is such a robust model that it doesn't have to be limited to health. You could take that very same model and deploy it for municipalities, for engineering firms, for what have you, because it's a true agnostic information model about common things that we take for granted. Like it's essentially, say, like dividing up the kinds of things that we do in healthcare are observations, instructions, actions, evaluations, like we make some judgment, like a problem list is an evaluation, an observation is a blood pressure, an action is providing a medication or a splint, and an instruction is an order to have a test done. The result of that order is an observation, which is the test results. And the demographic sits on top of that to explain the socioeconomic state and the demographic state of the individual. That essentially is a EMR in a nutshell, really. OpenEHR has made formalisms about that that are really useful, about versioning and about how they all link together and how you put it, right? It's agnostic to what you put in. So that leads to what's called the dual model approach, which is you've got OpenEHR as an information model, and then off to the side, you have a clinical model. And the standard, almost trite example of a clinical model is blood pressure. How boring. And these things are called archetypes, as a nod to psychiatry, I guess. But no, it's archetypical in that blood pressure always has a systolic, a diastolic. It's done with a certain cuff size. It's done on an arm, and it's done following a protocol, like lying, standing, just sitting, 5 measurements, top 3 taken by a machine. Those are all the components of a blood pressure. Well, OpenEHR has standardized how you do that and how you represent it and how you send it and exchange it with somebody. And it's unambiguous and it's done. They've done it for thousands of other things. And the sky's the limit on what a clinical model is. I'm working on detailed clinical information models for the socioeconomic determinant things and also for function, following the International Classification of Function by WHO. Making archetypes, clinical models, which is the stuff that will then be put into the framework of the information model. I hope that makes sense. It's a bit getting your head around, right? Dual modeling approach.
Yeah, I'm trying to nest different concepts in a larger nest that you've
Yeah.
painting for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So you take that blood pressure archetype and you plunk it into the observation component of the information model. And if that was a New York Heart Association scale of your heart failure, that would be available in a way that you would, as an observation, that you could pull in to say be the linked element of the severity in my problem list of this condition. Whereas the Canadian Study on Health and Aging frailty score would be the linked thing that gets sucked into a person who has frailty in their problem list. And my most recent entry of that is the one that I'm seeing. But if I click on it, I'll see all the entries and I'll see how the trajectory of their frailty has been over time, or their tobacco use, or their substance use, or what have you, because there's archetypes for substance use, for tobacco use. Even tobacco use right now in an EMR is all over the place. It's in social history, because remember we used to think it was a character weakness if you drank or smoked. Hey,
Yeah.
that's social. That's not medical. That's not healthcare. So our journey, or my standards work, is to remove all entries of substance use and tobacco from any social history subset and have it in the problem health concern subset so that people don't split it, following this crazy old model that we had. So anyway, that dual model thing is really important. FIRE doesn't have a model. FIRE is awesome at defining how you exchange things of all sorts between people in an unambiguous way, but it doesn't inform you how you build it and store it and use it at its endpoints. So, but CDA did, and FIRE actually there's very little that I see in FIRE that I can't relate my mind back to the old RIM model. And God help us, we do not want to go back to the full on and be driven by the RIM model, but we do want to be driven by the OpenEHR ISO 13606 and the ISO 21 something or other for the International Patient Summary, all those, and also the IDMP, the International Definition of Medical Products.
Did you call it the RIM model? RIM?
Yeah, it's the Reference Information Model. It's a Health HL7 RIM. It was a beast. However, it's kind of like a manual transmission, or if once you've had the experience with that, it does make important inroads into your mental models and how you think about these things. So it's one of those things Like when you go to school and you have to take something in literature, some seminal tome that, and you hate it because you wonder why. But then when you're older, you realize, you know what, there was like Homer and the Odyssey and other these things. There was a lot in there. There you go. You just saw elements of the rim model that just go flying by there. Yeah, it puts everything together in what's called UML, the Universal Modeling Language, and you can see child objects. And here's you're just trying to make this stuff exciting for people, because I'm sure by now people have long into their second beer. When is this going to end? I'm loving it, and I hope you are. But
I am, but this is a unique. Yeah, this is not for everybody,
this is
Bill.
Geek Squad. This is right. Yeah. So the World Wide Web is a phenomenal thing. The WWW consortium, the W3C, and there was a guy who did his thesis in 2000 about name value, what essentially boils down to name value pairs and how things relate to each other. It's kind of a ontological kind of approach about how do we think of things and contextualize them. And it all boils down to these pairs, or they're really triples. They're something is a something. A spaniel is a dog. Apple is a fruit, and so on and so forth. And just like type 2 diabetes is a endocrine disorder, and it's distinguished from type 1 diabetes, which is also an endocrine disorder. All that's in SNOMED that does all that stuff. Anyway, Google does amazing things. You've been using it, and what you've been doing is working with these pairs, and you've been able to very quickly do what's called use a knowledge graph, where the concept is the node, and the thing that connects nodes is the relationship. And there's many, you can be the product of, caused by, be a sub character of, which in that diagram that just flew by was the open arrows. That's a is a relationship, and parent child. So that is how EMRs and these standards should work. And that's what XML, all of that stuff gets represented in XML or JSON or other kinds of formats. It gets translated now into newfangled databases that are essentially graph databases. They run on nodes, and they don't run on the classical relational database that I grew up with. And they use languages like SparkQL, not SQL, to be able to natively process the graphs. And being able to generate graphs is what AI does. So a well done, well constructed, well modeled repository of where your EMR is built then becomes a mini Google exercise that fully supports the really kind of mundane, easy Google search that can take billions of records in an instant, but it also can take deep learning, because it can learn from the relationships. And I've got a really cool demonstration of that. It's a irreverent version of Mary Had a Little Lamb. It was Mary Had a Little Lamb. It's not off color or anything. It's something about how she's asked her to pass a plate and have some more. So it's not a nursery rhyme for children. But it was a demonstration how you can take open source tools and translate that simple nursery rhyme into a data frame, which gives you all the relationships that you need, which can then take a very complex entire book. The same process can take an entire book, and I can't remember the name of it. A Spanish book, has 7 layers of generation, very complex book, and it can translate that and give you all the relationships and everything in that book just by its own learning.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
we're sitting on those. We could be sitting on that very thing in our EMRs when they're constructed to these standards, so that it's so easy for the system to even learn that when you've had a mastectomy, your anatomic structure, and it's coded as with laterality. So you've had a right mastectomy for cancer, that your status, your anatomic status will say you have an absent breast. It'll also say that you have an absent uterus and cervix, so that when there's clinical decision support about pap smears, that it follows. It also, for trans individuals, will alert you that this woman needs a prostate exam, or this man needs a pap smear. Lots of evidence to show how that gets completely missed. But it's so easy for a system with encoded elements in the procedure list to translate that to anatomic state, which then feeds into the clinical decision support rules. And the physician shouldn't be sitting there clicking and making all this happen. The system just does it.
I mean, it's clear to me that we're talking about standards of architecture that can really enable, massive gains in supporting clinicians, and and not too many people know how to do this, but you're potentially one of them. So, what do you think are some of those barriers, the stumbling blocks in our system, maybe policies that are preventing us from getting where we need to be sooner? Anything come to mind for you for that?
It's I don't know how to. I can't. If I could figure the root cause of this, I'd probably become more active out there and trying to do something. But instead I just sort of sit here in kind of a river in despair a lot because I see.
That sounds so sad.
Yeah, it is so sad. But don't worry, it's not clinical. Um, okay, so a great example, because we talked earlier about how important it is to have a shared vision, a collaborative shared vision with all of our skills, including a sensitivity to the needs of government to satisfy population health, the budget, which is now we get more and more little infographics that show how the budget's getting eaten alive by healthcare. And yet we're still in a shortage and can't get access and all that sort of stuff. So sitting around and thinking of it as an enterprise architecture kind of exercise about the first starting with the value propositions that we need to execute on.
Can I pause you? I want to expand on the concept of enterprise architecture. It's kind of like how software can enable all the different operations that exist in healthcare, right? Is that a good summary of what enterprise architecture is?
Some people, you're right on, and 90% of enterprise architects would be saying, yeah, you're done and dusted. But my argument, and so is all of these great thought leaders around the world that I've been working with in the last decade, would argue that that's the final end of the path. It's essential, but it's not the be all and end all. So really, it's business architecture is a component of enterprise architecture. You could argue that there's business architecture and there's enterprise architecture, but really there's architecture. We call it our enterprise in that it covers the full breadth of the enterprise, and the full start of the enterprise is the value proposition.
Oh.
And then from a value proposition, so I wrote out, because I did all this in about 2014 in a formal way, and so really thinking about primary care from an architectural point of view, what is the value proposition? Barbara Starfield wrote about it ad nauseum with some brilliant stuff. And actually,
It was like trusting relationships and diagnoses, yeah?
You got it. So, but accessible care. If it's not accessible, it's not for nothing, right? People want to be actively involved in decisions that support their health. Not everybody does, but lots of people do want to be active participants, i.e. activated. The health promotion and prevention is huge. Adapting to the determinants of health, that's why I'm so fussed about all of this stuff to support that in EMRs. And so, of course, are all these people who've been imploring through the pandemic, including BC's privacy commissioner, why aren't you guys measuring race? And why don't we understand disparities? Or they're talking about equity. When I think about equity, I first think about disparity, because you can't easily identify or confidently identify inequity until you thoroughly looked at the gamut of disparity out there. And some of that disparity will say, you know what, that's normal. Women live longer than men, damn it. Uh, so, from our point of view, you and I, but that's a disparity, but it's not necessarily inequity. However, it can translate into an inequity by in the pandemic. Remember, they came up with that. Why is it that women have a higher death rate in the pandemic when we know that more men with COVID have severe repercussions? They're going, well, this doesn't make any sense. Well, who are the ones in long-term care? Mostly women, because they live longer. Because they live longer, they end up in long-term care more frequently than men. And when they're in long-term care in the pandemic, they were more susceptible to death from COVID. Hence, their gender did represent an inequity, but in an indirect way. So, but anyway, adapting to all of these determinants. And the longitudinal care that fosters trust, of course, is huge. Being a holistic expert and one who is there for your first presentation of a new medical problem. That's what Barbara Starfield found was the key to primary care, right there, in the context of that longitudinal relationship.
So let's summarize that for the listener to repeat. So the ability to be there when a new health condition arises, longitudinal care. Sorry, what were the other parts?
Well, yeah, there's longitudinal relationship, and one that is flexible and adaptable to considering the determinants of health as well as health promotion and prevention.
Health promotion.
So wellness, as we've heard that long by the alternative medical,
wellness.
Complementary medicine. I was trying to think of what King Charles used to call that in the early days. Also, the coordination and collaboration, we know about that is huge, like team-based care, and then we know from Barbara Starfield's work that the value proposition of what we just talked about, including cultural safety, I didn't mention that, lowers the cost while improving care. So hey, it's a win-win situation. You get people who trust their providers, who are happy with that they've got to the best possible state, given some of the bad nastiness that inevitably happens to us, at a lower cost. So that's the value proposition. So given that value proposition, we can spin that down into what services are necessary to support that value proposition. And we did a lot of focus groups on it. It was very frustrating. We were into about 3 hours one day, and with a bunch of us around a whiteboard. And finally, it just—
What table was this? What group was it?
Our division of family practice.
Okay.
We're working on trying to figure out how to make mental health and other things in the system work better.
Yes.
And we thought we would do what are the services in the enterprise architecture model that we plug in there. And we got primary care down to 20 main services.
Oh.
And 3 of them or 2 of them at the very least, maintenance of the longitudinal record and scheduling and stuff like that. The office admin were 2 of those. And then the rest were things like new medical problem, wellness, third-party certifications, procedural, all that kind of stuff. You can break it down to be quite simple. So then when you break that down, then you start moving down what are the processes that are needed to get into to deliver those services. And then then you spin down even further down into activities in those processes. Then you can start coming up the other side on your health information technology stuff that's needed to support it and the data points.
And this exercise is all for the purpose of developing software that could assist each of these 20 activity streams, yeah?
Yeah, so that's one of the purpose, but the other purpose is it's defining those activity streams. So software is only the thing that takes you to the final mile on it and makes it easier and possible to do various things that we could never do before, like all of this quality improvement and have all this decision support that I was just mentioning. But the bottom line is that the value proposition and those processes are what are the thing that's really driving everything. And the clarity of those processes that you achieve is so important. So if you've ever read Otto Scharmer's Theory U, and I was one of the lucky people as well who've been able to spend 3 days with Otto Sharma and Peter Senge in Vermont at a retreat where you're talking about these things at a very deep
Wow.
level. A lot of
Wow.
very
Peter Senge and Otto Sharma. Okay.
yeah, in one group with them one on, or right there, not one on one, but four on one sometimes. Um, and um, so so that's you deconstruct. So Otto Scharmer's theory U, essentially in a nutshell, is about how do you deconstruct your problems. You keep going down and down and down on a by deconstructing into, okay, I have this problem, but it's related to this problem, which is related to this problem, which is, and you go down. It's like a child that,
Going to root cause, right? You're going to the
yes,
root causal
yep. And
event.
then
Yeah.
you break it down into atomic parts of your system or your issue, and then you reconstruct it using a different way of like open thought, like the inquiring mind, to reconstruct to a way that should have been in the first place.
An ideal state, ideal future state. Yeah.
Yes.
So
So
a theory of change,
that's
causality.
right. Yes, the theory of change and system thinking, which is Peter Senge's magic fifth discipline, right? That's the systems thinking part. So I married enterprise architecture as a discipline with Otto Scharmer's as a construct and Peter Senge's five disciplines into one diagram that shows this U, where the value proposition and your key performance indicators and your process performance indicators, yeah, that's the book, and all come back up the other side with your applications and your platforms and your decision support tools. But that's, if you can't build that effectively until you, and you can't even run your business, you can't even get off the ground. In fact, you would do better to do the bit on the left-hand side, deconstructing through all these services and processes, and quit with paper than you would if you did it the other way around and build all these systems, which of course wouldn't connect back to your processes anyway, because they would be, that's a classic development issue, right? Get somebody, make my life better with IT. IT is going to do it. Well, no, IT is not going to make your life better. It will more likely make it worse unless you know precisely what you want it to do for you.
It sounds like you're really whittling it down to what's the key purpose. Why are we all here, and what is the ideal outcome, so that you get the most direct route to that outcome rather than workarounds. You're eliminating all the workarounds. Yeah, like first principles kind of thing.
First principles. So on that spirit of looking at the system as a whole, here's one of my despairs that I mentioned sitting here in Campbell River, uh, um, feeling powerless in some respect. So we designed AmCare originally to be able to fully define a panel, a clinic, clinics within a community, communities within a local health area, local health areas within an HSDA, and the entire province. And do it all in a way that was safe for all participants, especially the patient, no possibility of exposure of patient data and really little possibility of exposure of clinic performance or practitioner performance, but nevertheless get a really good picture of the whole. And of all sorts of things, like even the lifetime prevention schedule. As you know, the Health Data Coalition measures mostly cover the key ingredients of the BC government lifetime prevention schedule. So there we go. We got GPSC, FPSC now, holding the keys to that. The ministry and the Doctors of BC jointly funding that. We've got doctors adopting it to the tune now of about 2.4 million charts coverage by the HDC. And along comes a longitudinal family practice funding model, which needs a panel, something that the HDC has already been doing for 2.6 million or 4 million. I think it's 2.6 now. You probably know better than me here.
I think you're right. I think it's around 2.6. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, so why wouldn't we, in a collaborative system that are all the partners with all of their skills coming along, say, this is an awesome way to get every family practitioner in the province on the HDC to do the base level of the measures. So we're going to get 200 and some odd measures out of the box for that. that have been validated and approved by physician governance. You're going to get the panel for all of those that you could transmit with FHIR to the ministry every month. Here's the panel, here's the panel. And physicians would be moved to keep their panel clean because it's part of their payment, but as they keep it clean, it's part of their QI. It provides now 90% coverage. Well, okay, let's be really conservative right now with the gap and the unattached patients. Let's say 75% coverage of the province, similar to what we had in 2010 with AmCare for the North. 75% coverage of comprehensive primary care data with problem lists, med lists, the whole 9 yards, socioeconomic determinants of health, a person's gender as they wish it to be expressed or to be documented and exposed, and race, ethnicity, housing, all that stuff, and dynamically updated with encounters by a team, because then that's not all on the doctor's head to do, and functional status, which we put into the funding model that we had in the North, and the complexity determination was included functional status, which was a multiplier on your chronic disease, which was further multiplied by your poverty, which was determined by the Public Health Agency of Canada's recommended questions for poverty, discreetly put in the EMR with codes. Wouldn't that be a tremendous thing to collaborate on? Now the funding model, the panel, the attachment requirements. I've got net attachment figures, calculations, demonstration, how the HDC can show the net, how many have left, why they've left, did they change doctors, did they die, did they move away, did they come in, did they re-come in as somebody who previously was attached? All that can be shown in a single graph over any period of time, over any aggregation of, say, 75% of the population. That to me seems like a no-brainer, but it was issued as, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to send claims on a system built in 1986 that I love when I built to it in 1986 or in 1989. I have the code has not changed much at all in 30 years because it's such a solid system. However, it's a billing system. And what we're talking about is what we need in that comprehensive information model of the patient and how it's situated with those elements of the observations, evaluations, and so on, and the demographics. We got that, we built it, and it's paid for by the province. It's not a conflict of interest or a consortium, and the data cannot be commoditized. It's part of the governance.
I want to make sure I didn't lose you. You said that this is built, and you're talking about Health Data Coalition, yeah?
Yes, that's it.
The Discover platform.
Yes.
It's funded for through public funding, and it's available to do all those things that you mentioned. But for some reason, there was a no, and people chose to go with the teleplan system. Is that right?
That's right.
And and it sounds like you don't understand the rationale as to why we're going with teleplan. But
well, I think I get the rationale, and I'm not trying to throw bricks from the alley. I recognize that government ministries need to feel some element of control of what they have, and it needs to feed into existing things that data has been moving around with. However, those existing things I do know from firsthand experience are old, and this is an opportunity to move to new levels of sophistication and integration and engagement with providers whose data can be used by the ministry and divisions and everybody else to do the planning, albeit within the constraints of making sure, as the Health Data Coalition, as you know so well, it seeks to ensure that context is retained and bad decisions aren't made because people in government are interpreting measures in ways that are not congruent with reality, right? So you can jump to a conclusion that something's broken. The conclusion of brokenness is valid, but your attribution of what's broken is wrong in the way that you've interpreted the measure, right? Because you don't understand what's behind it. But collaboratively, everybody's wanting to share and get this down right. So for example, I could tell you quite categorically in a number of areas from HTC data that the smoking rate is just about solved. However, I know that the smoking registration or the documentation of smoking status in EMRs is variably completed. And the default is nothing, which means they're a non-smoker, which means everybody's celebrating and we don't need to do anything about tobacco. That's the wrong conclusion.
Yeah.
Right? But I mean, that's a pretty simplistic and non life-threatening kind of a thing. And well, I guess it could be a life-threatening thing when you're thinking about tobacco cessation, but other things like medication use and other things are really important that we, and wellness, lifetime prevention schedule, like respectful interaction with citizens by properly managing their gender and having it exchanged correctly. And citizens being able to take a personal health record and update through the gateway, through a FHIR interface, to make all this seamless for a good citizen experience as well as a good provider experience.
I'm just showing the lifetime prevention schedule on screen just so that if folks really wanted to read up on it.
Yeah. There are a few graphs. There's a summary PDF in the lifetime prevention schedule that some people might find quite interesting on how they determine which ones of all the different things that you can do for screening. And there's a thing called quality adjusted life years analysis and things like that that went into why pap smear is great, why chlamydial screening in people from age, well, I think it used to be 18 to 24, but that age group keeps changing, actually downward on the younger age and upward on the older age in terms of being a reasonable thing to do. Because what it does in terms of morbidity and mortality.
And what brought us into this particular part of the discussion was asking you what models and stuff are stumbling blocks for us to reach where we need to go. And it sounds like the answer is that some of us really resist change and resist complexity. Some of us resist and we'll go with what has worked historically and kind of discount the vision for what is really needed for the future. Does that resonate?
It totally resonates. And just to bring the conversation full circle, that's exactly what was going on in the 1970s with sustainable yield in Canada and the US. And you go from a simplistic view that
forestry, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So that when you had a formula that a guy by the name of Hanslick had done in 1922, and it fit in a nice little box, and it made logical sense until you started to get down into the weeds of the modeling thinking. So it's the same thing that we're dealing with here right now, is to take it up a notch now to the next level. And I don't think and because healthcare has been such a juggernaut for so long, for so many different jurisdictions, although we seem to be struggling a lot more than many, in our plentiness, as it were, plentifulness, that we need to have different models to think, collaborate, and do what we've just been talking about. It's got to be blown up a bit, and I guess the elastic band of chaos theory is just too tight. It keeps drawing us back to the old equilibrium. But as you might know, in chaos theory or in dynamic system change, there's that notion of the stability of an equilibrium, which could be good or a bad equilibrium. And you can keep going, stretching and stretching away from that equilibrium and drawing back until eventually you end up flipping to a brand new equilibrium. And now you can't get out of the new equilibrium. And that new equilibrium, I'm afraid right now, is starting to look like one of unattachment of resource challenges that can't be solved by throwing more money at it, and will maybe not even be solved by throwing massive quantities of more human power at it. Because at some point, when your health budget is 3/4 of your entire budget, now what's going to happen with schools and roads and social services and other things, right? So that's why I think in a good way, just like that theory can spin you into a very bad equilibrium state, like take a forested land into a desert, and then it takes you a huge amount of work to bring it back to a forested land again, because all of a sudden the evaporation stuff and everything is gone, right? Your protection is gone. We want to get on this now so we can start working towards a healthy equilibrium that's equally hard to break from, but it's a healthy state to be in. And to me, that would be reflected in things like us collaborating together with systems, stuff that's already paid for, that we can see multi-purposes for a richer WWW consortium view with the data that we have available as a result of doing this, as opposed to continuing with this other way of doing it, which is not good.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is that our new equilibrium, that is the desired future state equilibrium of hopefully sustainability, and hopefully there's a stickiness in this new state of equilibrium. The change that needs to happen is, in part, it's everybody. Everybody's consciousness needs to be raised. We need to kind of create a spaciousness and a tolerance for complexity that is different from what's has been historically, on average. A tolerance for complexity, and also an acceptance of innovation and just kind of new ways of thinking of things. Um, yeah, a spaciousness, especially in leadership, for entertaining these models. And these models,
Exactly.
and many of these are already built, like you said. This thinking has been trying to push out of its envelope, and has been it's already, much of it, some of the building blocks are already there, but they're not being adopted yet.
Yeah. And that's where informed leadership, I think, is so important. So, because it's one thing to be listening to all the different advice you get. That's great. You have to do that. A good leader is not somebody who, runs the whole intellectual state of it all. But there needs to be at some point where the leaders get together with the people that know, that have the background and the knowledge, where they can get, as you're trying to do. And I'm very impressed with how you're trying to translate this to something that just makes logical common sense. So if you're a leader who throws entire trust to your the people who report to you, you could get yourself into deep trouble if that trust is broken and not warranted. So a good leader puts people around them that can describe stuff in ways that are understandable and make common sense, and then you can get to that level. So I still remember the forestry faculty at UBC in the 70s. Dean was a chemical engineer, and people were saying, well, what the hell, we got a chemical engineer as the head of the forestry faculty. We turned out to be a very good dean. And he said, I think I'm a better dean because I don't know anything about forestry, because I have to learn. And I listen to the people that can explain it to me well and logically. And when I get it, I can say, yeah, let's go do that then. Thank you.
It sounds like it requires that leaders have a mindset of humility, that I don't know anything in this area. It sounds like it requires leaders who trust in the knowledge keepers to be trustworthy and to really know about those things, and it requires a level of risk tolerance. So as a leader, I need to take a risk and try something new, and be okay with testing it maybe on a smaller scale before I make it a bigger scale, kind of like the PDSA cycle idea.
Absolutely. And the other thing, of course, if we're working well together as a team, we don't beat each other up with failures. So government is totally averse to failures. But I must say, for me, when I see somebody going out on a limb, like your Instagram thing yesterday, Dave talked to Richard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you be Dr. Richard. Yeah.
yeah, that was awesome. And if the current direction about the safer supply or whatever that the government has is right or wrong, to me, it doesn't matter. If I can see that there's these kind of conversations and processes, we'll learn together, and but somebody's making a decision the best that you can for today based upon sound principles and talking to the right people. So we should be having governments. I mean, this is so idealistic that it's getting totally out of hand, but like why? And we have a population that is now degenerating to new social depths that we've never experienced before, never thought possible globally. But we should be able to have governments that stand for principle and not worry about the voter per se, but of course doing it in a way that they're trying to inform people to agree with what they're doing, right? But not worrying about how it looks or whether it's a failure. Because if we all sit there and agree with your platform and it doesn't work, then we're all culpable and it's right. It's okay, let's get over it. And in the QI sense, figure out how do we alter our course. We've learned something really solid here now by whatever happened. So let's move in that direction.
Yeah, yeah. We need leaders who are not chasing public approval, but are really driven by principle and what seems to be right, and surrounding themselves with great advisors and great team members. Yeah,
Yep.
resonates. You know, you've shared some of your despair with us on this podcast, and they're pretty unique things to despair about because you're in a unique position. You have been historically in a unique position in working in very interesting areas that are not common. Some of the common despairs right now with family physicians is a sense of overwhelm. Like they can't seem to manage all the volume of the patients that come to them. It's really challenging to develop care plans that are executable in the current system with the minimum with not enough resources. There's a sense of rarely a sense of I'm doing a great job as a family doc because the systems around us and the teams are not around us. What do you have any advice? Do you have any thoughts or ideas on that we can share with these physicians? And there's no pressure, you know, like
Yeah, right.
I know you don't have the answers, so but yeah, what would you say?
Well, I think I did think about this before, and I kind of got stuck because it's a tough conundrum. But what centers me, and I'm trying to now think by extension to others, is at least keeping that value proposition top of mind about what I'm doing. This would apply, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Artist, cabinet maker, whatever. You've got a drive and an understanding, because if you're in any of these roles, you're good at something. You've got some innate interest and you have some training and some skills. So think about that value proposition deeply. So when you're in the trenches and everything that looks like hell, you're filling out all these off work certificates. Your waiting room's full. You're getting paid a bit better now, but still, even money, you throw enough money at stuff, you can break things. It's still not the greatest environment to be working in, right? So then thinking around, well, what can I do to either make my situation better? That's a QI thing, and deal with these things that are irritating me terribly, which could be how do I do my administrative stuff faster? How do I get patients cycling faster? How do I work with a team member better? Because I know from the model of the College of Family Physicians patient-centered medical home that there's certain structural elements that we've all agreed now. You know how long we've agreed on that for over 15 years, that model. It gets tweaked, it gets shown in a different way of doing a diagram. I used to have a way of taking the pillars and converting it from the pillars this way with the writing so that you could read it. Like I was looking at one of my presentations, that was 12 years ago that I had a presentation that did that. But anyway, we know these things. So you can take the individual approach and focus on yourself and try to do your thing and maybe share with others, and there'll be a movement a bit. Or you can, how can my division, my PCN, do it? Is there a group that I can get involved with, like something that's associated with the RCCBC or the Doctors of BC or something, where I would be able to champion some elements of this, not boil the ocean, champion something, so that at least you've got the coordinates and you're heading towards the value proposition. Because I think the human spirit fails when we don't have the hope and the at least a destiny that might change a bit as we go. We change our mind about what's the good destiny, but you need some kind of a destiny, some general direction, just like the Polynesians who apparently might have made it to South America or to Central America. They just had a general sense. I want to go over there because I think there might be some better fruit or something. So that sounds idealistic, but I think it's also realistic with my experience with people that I see that are happier in their work and not just in the healthcare space.
Yeah, I I see that as well. That resonates. You know, trying to figure what we can control, and then trying to exert and learn our influence in some part of the system to guide and to steward some resources in a direction that makes sense and that connects with our sense of purpose and meaning.
Right.
Yeah. Bill, it's been 2.5 hours or more, and I really appreciate you. You know, I thank you for taking this time and for your energy and for your devotion to this province. It's clear that you've put so many hours into caring, and that you're sending your care out through all your different projects. And I mean, it stands out to me that you gave a lot of gifts of software of projects into our system, and most people don't know. So I see it and I appreciate you, and I look forward to our next chat because we definitely I have so many more questions to ask you, and I'm excited to learn more from you. So I'm going to share
Okay.
this out, and I think a lot of people are going to learn from it. So I appreciate you.
Well, I really want to know who made it to the end. That's fortitude.
I don't know how to even track that. It would be very interesting to see. Yeah, yeah. You should get a medal when you get to the end, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And I think I also really want to reciprocate by saying that I think your approach to doing this, and I've watched some of your podcasts and how you do it is phenomenal, and your energy is enviable. I wish that I had the same energy. I think I did when I was your age, but that's in the rearview mirror. But it's great to see you picking up the flag and running like hell. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's obvious that you definitely have a ton of energy. I mean, the mental energy. Do you have an eidetic memory or something, Bill? Like, how do you remember everything?
I don't know. It is a bit weird and it's scary sometimes, but yeah. But like I say to people who are struggling with various things, it's really not so much memory as causal thinking or modeling thinking. I think in models and causation. I did very well in calculus, not because I memorized formulas. I had to figure, I spent a lot of time figuring out how do these bloody formulas work. So when I went into an exam, I wasn't in freeze mode about trying to remember what's the formula. I just sort of figured it out.
You were puzzling through it in the moment, and you
Yeah.
believed you could puzzle through it. You believed you could find the thread of order within the chaos. Hmm.
Yeah, I know, and the healthcare thing has defeated me. Calculus is a piece of cake, but this is hard. This is
With that, I'm going to stop recording. Oh,
okay.
wait. You said that people could contact you. How do people contact you? You did say that people could reach out if they wanted.
Well, I'm on Facebook, as you know, um,
Bill
and
Clifford.
yeah, and and the only people who are going to be listening to this probably already have my email, which is just simply my name, bill.clifford@gmail.com.
Is it Bill dot Clifford or is it Bill Clifford?
It doesn't matter, but most people you put the dot. That's the standard is that the dot doesn't matter, right?
Oh,
Most
wow.
people don't know that, but it's only for the human eye. It's the same as a CDA document. There's a lot of tags and things in there just for the human eye.
I just learned something new. Like, well, I mean, I learned a lot new, but so periods don't matter in email addresses. Is that what you just told me?
Yeah, they're ignored.
That's amazing. Good to know. So Bill Clifford at gmail.com. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm actually surprised that you're the Bill Clifford at gmail.com because I'm assuming there's other Bill Cliffords in the world. So that's
Well,
impressive.
that's a bit of a problem for me. So if there is a Bill Clifford out there who thinks that that's their email, it's not, and stop using it.
you're, getting, you're getting funny messages.
The guy in Palm Springs with a Hyundai that keeps going for service, that's not your email address.
Is this a real story?
Real story. There's a guy who has high-end sailboats in Australia. There's somebody who donates regularly to the Red Cross in the UK and has an Apple computer. They all are Bill Clifford, and they all think that billclifford@gmail.com is their email.
Oh my God. I really hope that they are the ones who are listening and get to the end, because we could solve some problems. We could do some real change in this world.
Right.
Thank you for spending your Saturday with me, and we'll see you soon. I'm sure, maybe at a clinical data stewardship committee meeting or alumni stewardship meeting. Yeah.
Yes, you bet. Okay,
Okay.
thanks, Lawrence.
Talk soon. Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.